A racist cop thought harassing a young black kid was just another way to flex his power. But when the kid's crew showed up, things went downhill fast. What happened next shocked everyone. The summer heat was unrelenting, casting a heavy stillness over the small suburban street. Marcus, a 15-year-old black kid with a mischievous grin and boundless energy, was shooting hoops with his younger brother Jamal outside their modest home. The squeak of sneakers on asphalt and the dull thud of the ball hitting the backboard were the only sounds cutting through the quiet afternoon. "Come on, Jamal. Put some power into it." Marcus laughed as his little brother tossed the ball toward the hoop. It bounced off the rim, rolling onto the sidewalk. "Close enough, kid," he said, tousling Jamal's hair. Across the street, a white patrol car crept along, its siren silent, but its presence loud. Officer Donnelly, a man who carried his badge like a weapon, scanned the neighborhood through his sunglasses. Everyone knew Donnelly. His reputation wasn't built on service or protection. It was built on intimidation. "Hey, what's up with the cop?" Jamal asked nervously, glancing toward the car. Marcus frowned, his smile fading. "Don't look at him, Jamal. Just keep playing." He retrieved the ball, but the joy in their game had already dimmed. Donnelly stopped his car abruptly, the tires crunching against the curb. He stepped out, his boots heavy against the pavement. Marcus felt his heart race as the officer crossed the street, heading straight toward them. "You boys causing trouble." Donnelly's voice was sharp, his hand resting casually on his belt near his holstered weapon. Marcus stepped in front of Jamal, his protective instincts kicking in. "No, sir. Just playing basketball outside our house." His voice was calm, but his hands balled into fists at his sides. Donnelly smirked, tilting his sunglasses down to look Marcus in the eye. "Is that so?" "Funny, because I got a call about some suspicious activity in the area, a couple of kids matching your description." Marcus swallowed hard. He knew there hadn't been any call, just like he knew this cop wasn't here to chat. "We haven't done anything wrong." Donnelly took a step closer, invading Marcus's space. "You got a smart mouth on you, huh?" Jamal tugged at Marcus's shirt. "Marcus, let's just go inside," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Stay right there, kid." Donnelly barked at Jamal. The younger boy froze, tears welling in his eyes. Marcus's chest tightened. "Leave my brother out of this," he said, his voice firmer now. Donnelly chuckled, a sound that was more menace than humor. "You don't get to tell me what to do, boy." He reached for Marcus's arm, and that's when it happened. The spark that lit the fire. "Get your hands off me," Marcus snapped, jerking his arm away. "Don't you dare touch him," a voice shouted from down the street. Marcus turned to see his cousin Deshaun and two of his friends walking up, their strides confident and their faces set in defiance. Deshaun was tall, broad-shouldered, and known around the neighborhood for not taking anyone's nonsense, especially from cops like Donnelly. Donnelly straightened, suddenly aware that his lone presence wasn't as intimidating anymore. "Back up, or you'll regret it," he warned, his hand now firmly on his gun. Deshaun didn't flinch. "Regret it? You're the one harassing kids for no reason," he shot back, his voice loud enough for neighbors to hear. Windows started to open. The faint sound of murmurs spread through the block. Marcus's heart pounded. The street that had been still and silent moments ago was now alive with tension, every second stretching into an eternity. Donnelly's face flushed red, his authority slipping away with every step Deshaun and his crew took closer. "You don't scare me," Marcus finally said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. "Not anymore." Donnelly glanced around, noticing the growing crowd. He saw phones being raised, cameras recording every moment. He cursed under his breath and stepped back, his eyes darting between Marcus and Deshaun. "This isn't over," Donnelly growled, retreating to his patrol car. As the car sped away, the tension lingered in the air. Marcus exhaled, his hands shaking. Jamal clung to his side, tears streaming down his face. "It's okay, Jamal," Marcus whispered, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. Deshaun clapped a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You good, man?" Marcus nodded, though his mind raced with what could have happened. He knew this wasn't the end. Donnelly wasn't the kind of man to let something like this go. As the crowd dispersed and the street quieted, Marcus looked at his brother, his cousin, and the place they called home. For the first time, the street didn't feel safe. It felt like a battlefield, and he wasn't sure if they'd won or just delayed the next fight. The neighborhood had returned to a strange calm by the next day, but the tension lingered like a storm waiting to break. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of Donnelly's grip on his arm or the fear in Jamal's eyes. He sat on the porch steps, spinning a basketball absent-mindedly between his hands, his mind racing. Deshawn walked up the driveway, his usual swagger subdued. "Yo, Marcus, you good?" Marcus shook his head. "Nah, man. He's coming back. You saw his face." Deshawn sighed, sitting beside him. Donnelly's been pulling this crap for years. He thinks he owns this block like he's untouchable. Jamal peeked out the front door, hesitant. "Marcus, you think he's gonna hurt us?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the humid summer breeze. Marcus stood and placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Not while I'm around," he said firmly. Deshawn nodded. "We got your back too. Don't forget that." Suddenly, the distant wail of a siren broke through the air. Marcus froze, his chest tightening. The sound was faint at first, but grew louder, closer, until it stopped abruptly down the block. He craned his neck to see the same patrol car idling at the corner. "It's him," Marcus said through clenched teeth. Donnelly stepped out of the car, this time with 2 other officers. They weren't just passing through, they were there for something. "Stay inside, Jamal," Marcus said, his voice sharper than he intended. He turned to Deshawn. "We've got to figure this out before things get worse." Deshawn cracked his knuckles. "Don't worry, man. He's not scaring us into hiding." The officers began walking toward a small convenience store on the block, their presence unmistakably hostile. Marcus and Deshawn watched from the porch as Donnelly pushed open the store's glass door, disappearing inside. Moments later, raised voices echoed out into the street. "What's he doing in there?" Marcus asked, his heart pounding. "Let's find out," Deshawn replied, already heading down the steps. "Wait," Marcus hissed, grabbing his arm. "If he sees us." "He already knows us," Deshawn interrupted. "We're not the problem. He is." Reluctantly, Marcus followed, his nerves wound tight. As they reached the edge of the block, a small group of neighbors had gathered, whispering nervously. Inside the store, Donnelly was yelling at the clerk, a middle-aged black man named Mr. Harris, who was known for his kindness and patience. "I said, show me the tape," Donnelly barked, slamming his fist on the counter. "I told you there's no tape. Nothing happened here," Mr. Harris replied, his voice steady but strained. "You think I'm stupid?" Donnelly snapped, leaning closer. Marcus clenched his fists, his anger bubbling to the surface. "He's trying to pin something on Mr. Harris," he whispered to Deshawn. Deshawn nodded, his jaw tight. Typical Donnelly. Bully the people who can't fight back. The tension in the crowd grew. Someone whispered, "He's been harassing Harris for months," while another added, "That cop's out of control." Marcus couldn't stay silent any longer. He stepped forward, his voice strong. "Hey, leave him alone." The officers turned, their gazes sharp and intimidating. Donnelly's smirk returned as he locked eyes with Marcus. "Oh, it's you again," he said, stepping out of the store. "Didn't get enough yesterday?" The crowd murmured, their unease giving way to anger. Marcus stood his ground. "We're all tired of you harassing people for no reason." Donnelly took a slow step toward him. "You better watch your mouth, kid. You don't want this to get ugly." But before Marcus could respond, Deshawn stepped up beside him. "It's already ugly, Donnelly. You're the only one who doesn't see it." The officers exchanged looks, their postures stiffening. The growing crowd emboldened Marcus, who now felt the strength of the community behind him. "Let's go," one of the other officers muttered to Donnelly, glancing nervously at the phones pointed in their direction. Donnelly hesitated, his frustration visible, but he backed off, retreating to the patrol car. The other officers followed, and the car sped away, leaving the block in a heavy, tense silence. Marcus exhaled, his hands still shaking. He turned to Deshawn. "This isn't over, man. He's not going to stop." "No," Deshawn said, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "But neither are we." The crowd began to disperse, but the weight of what had happened lingered. For Marcus, it wasn't just about standing up to Donnelly. It was about protecting his family, his friends, and his neighborhood. He didn't know what was coming next, but he knew one thing: they couldn't face it alone. The next few days were restless. Marcus could feel the tension simmering just beneath the surface of his neighborhood, ready to boil over. Word spread fast about the confrontation outside Mr. Harris's store, and Donnelly's name was on everyone's lips. Some were angry, some were afraid, and others, like Marcus, felt an urgency to do something before things got worse. Deshawn was waiting for him outside the house early the next morning, leaning against his bike with a determined look. "You ready?" "Ready for what?" Marcus asked, stepping onto the porch. Deshawn motioned down the street. "We're going to talk to some people, get everyone on the same page. If Donnelly thinks he can just keep coming around here, harassing us, we've got to show him we're not backing down." Marcus hesitated. "I don't know, man. What if he retaliates?" Deshawn's expression softened. "He's already doing that, Marcus. But if we let him keep walking all over us, he'll never stop. The only way to handle this is together." Marcus nodded slowly. "All right, let's do it." The two of them made their way through the neighborhood, stopping at houses, stores, and the local park to talk with neighbors. People shared stories of how Donnelly had overstepped, harassing kids, accusing shop owners of petty crimes, and making people feel unsafe in their own community. By midday, they had gathered a group of nearly 20 people at the basketball court, where Marcus and Jamal played. The group was diverse: kids, parents, elders, but they all had one thing in common: they were tired of living in fear. Deshawn stepped forward, his voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. "We've all seen what Donnelly's been doing. He thinks because he's got a badge, he can do whatever he wants, but we're not going to let him keep pushing us around." The group murmured in agreement, their voices growing louder. One of the elders, Miss Carroll, raised her hand. "But what can we do? He's the law. If we stand up to him, he'll just make it worse." "That's why we have to be smart," Deshawn said. "We're not here to fight him. We're here to protect each other and make sure the truth gets out. If enough people see what he's doing, he can't hide behind his badge anymore." Marcus stepped up beside him. "He wants us to be afraid. But we've got something stronger than fear. We've got each other. If we stick together, he can't touch us." The group nodded, their confidence growing. Deshawn continued, "We need to keep recording everything he does. If he shows up, if he tries to harass someone, we get it on video. We don't confront him alone. We stay together." Marcus added, "And we don't let him divide us. He's been trying to make us feel small, but we're not. We've got a voice, and we're going to use it." The crowd cheered, the energy shifting from fear to determination. But as the group dispersed, Marcus couldn't shake the unease in his chest. Donnelly wasn't the type to back down, and he had a feeling the cop was already planning his next move. That evening, as Marcus walked home with Deshawn, the sound of tires crunching on gravel made them both turn. A dark patrol car crawled slowly up the street, its headlights cutting through the twilight. Marcus's heart raced. Donnelly leaned out of the driver's side window, his smirk more menacing than ever. "You boys think you're smart, huh?" Neither of them replied, but Deshawn clenched his fists at his sides. Donnelly chuckled, his voice low and mocking. "I see what you're trying to do, stirring people up, making them think they can stand against me. But let me tell you something. You can't win." Marcus took a step forward, his voice steady, despite the fear clawing at him. "We're not trying to win. We're just trying to live." Donnelly's smirk faded, replaced by a hard glare. He let the car idle for a moment longer before speeding off into the night, the sound of the engine echoing through the quiet street. Marcus exhaled shakily. "This is gonna get worse, isn't it?" Deshawn nodded. "Yeah, it is. But we're ready for him." Marcus hoped he was right. The tension finally erupted 2 nights later. Marcus was sitting in the living room with Jamal, trying to focus on the game playing on their old TV, when a loud knock echoed through the house. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the kind that made his stomach twist in fear. "Marcus," Deshawn's voice called from outside, urgent and shaky. "You need to come out here now." Marcus ran to the door and swung it open. Deshawn stood on the porch, his face grim. "It's Donnelly. He's got a group of cops, and they're outside Harris's store again." Marcus didn't need to ask more. He grabbed his phone and stepped outside, feeling the warm summer air wrap around him like a heavy blanket. Jamal followed, but Marcus stopped him at the porch. "Stay here, Jamal. You don't need to see this." "But," Jamal protested, his eyes wide with worry. "Stay," Marcus said firmly, looking back at his brother. The walk to the store felt longer than ever, even though it was just a few blocks away. When they arrived, the scene was worse than Marcus had imagined. Donnelly stood in front of the store, flanked by 2 other officers. His hand rested on the butt of his gun, and Mr. Harris was pinned against the wall, his face tense but calm. "Where's the paperwork for your inventory?" Donnelly barked. "I've already shown you everything I have," Mr. Harris said, his voice steady but strained. "You've been in here 3 times this week. What else do you want?" Donnelly leaned in, his face inches from Harris's. "I'll tell you what I want, the truth. If you're hiding something, I'll find it." "You're harassing him," a voice shouted from the crowd that had begun to gather. Marcus recognized the voice. It was Miss Carroll. She stood at the front of the group, her arms crossed tightly, her face set in defiance. "Step back," one of the other officers warned the crowd. "This is police business." "This isn't police business," Marcus yelled, stepping forward. "This is you using your badge to bully people who haven't done anything wrong." Donnelly turned, his eyes narrowing when he saw Marcus. "Oh, you again, always sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Marcus didn't flinch. "It's my business when you keep showing up here, trying to intimidate people." Deshawn stepped beside Marcus, holding up his phone, the camera already recording. "Smile for the camera, Donnelly. The whole neighborhood's watching this time." Donnelly's smirk faltered as more phones went up, the crowd growing larger by the second. He straightened, glancing at the other officers. "Disperse the crowd," he ordered. The officers hesitated, looking at the sea of faces now armed with cameras. One of them muttered, "This isn't a good idea, Donnelly." But Donnelly wasn't listening. He shoved Mr. Harris back against the wall. "I'm not done with you." Marcus felt a surge of anger rise in his chest. He stepped forward, his voice trembling with both fear and determination. "You are done, right now." Donnelly turned toward him, his face red with fury. "What did you just say to me?" Before Marcus could respond, Deshawn yelled, "Hey!" drawing everyone's attention. "You think you can keep this up forever, Donnelly? Everyone here sees what you're doing. You're finished." Donnelly's composure cracked. He grabbed for Marcus's arm, but this time Marcus didn't back away. The crowd surged closer, their voices rising in a chorus of outrage. "Let him go!" someone shouted. "You're not above the law!" yelled another. Donnelly hesitated, realizing just how outnumbered he was. Phones were recording from every angle, and even his fellow officers looked uneasy. Slowly, he released Marcus's arm, his hand twitching as if resisting the urge to lash out further. "This isn't over," Donnelly growled, glaring at Marcus and Deshawn before turning to his officers. "Let's go." The patrol cars pulled away, but the crowd didn't disperse. Instead, they turned their attention to Marcus and Deshawn, their voices filled with gratitude and determination. "You stood up to him," Miss Carroll said, her voice shaking with emotion. "We've been living in fear of that man for years. It's about time someone made him back down." "We all stood up," Marcus said, looking around at the group. "It's not just me or Deshawn, it's all of us. That's why he backed off." The crowd murmured in agreement, their collective anger now channeled into a sense of unity. "We need to report this," someone said. "Yeah, but who do we report it to?" another asked. "The whole system's got his back." Deshawn stepped forward. "Not anymore. We've got proof now, video evidence. We take this to the news, to lawyers, to anyone who'll listen. If we make enough noise, they can't ignore us." Marcus nodded. "And we don't stop until Donnelly and anyone like him is held accountable." The crowd began to scatter, their voices filled with determination rather than fear. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt united. As Marcus and Deshawn walked home, the weight of what had just happened began to sink in. "You think this is really going to work?" Marcus asked. Deshawn shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I don't know. But we started something tonight, and that's more than he ever thought we'd do." Marcus nodded, a flicker of hope warming his chest. For the first time, he felt like they might actually have a chance to change things. The courtroom was packed. Marcus sat in the front row, his fists clenched in his lap as the murmur of voices filled the room. To his left sat Deshawn, calm and resolute, and behind them were neighbors who had come to witness the moment they had fought so hard to bring about. Miss Carroll, Mr. Harris, and even Jamal, dressed in his best shirt and tie, were there. The weeks leading up to this day had been exhausting. The videos of Donnelly's harassment, collected and shared by the neighborhood, had gone viral. Community leaders, civil rights lawyers, and local news outlets had rallied behind the case, applying pressure on city officials to take action. Now, Donnelly sat at the defendant's table, his once smug expression replaced by a look of irritation. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, but he didn't respond. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. "The state of Georgia versus Officer William Donnelly." Marcus exhaled slowly as the prosecutor stood, laying out the charges: harassment, abuse of power, and multiple violations of civil rights. The evidence was damning, videos from multiple incidents, including the confrontation at Mr. Harris's store, and testimonies from community members. Miss Carroll was the first to take the stand. Her voice was steady, but the emotion in her words was undeniable. "That man made us feel like prisoners in our own homes. He used his badge as a weapon, not to protect us, but to control us." The prosecutor played video after video, showing Donnelly's confrontations with Marcus, Mr. Harris, and others in the community. Each clip drew murmurs from the courtroom, the weight of the evidence undeniable. When Marcus's turn came, he felt the eyes of the entire room on him as he approached the stand. He glanced at Jamal, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. "Tell us what happened the day Officer Donnelly confronted you and your brother," the prosecutor said. Marcus took a deep breath. "We were just playing basketball outside our house when he pulled up. He started accusing us of causing trouble, even though we hadn't done anything. When I stood up for my brother, he grabbed me." "And what happened next?" "Deshawn and some of my neighbors came over. They stood up to him. That's when he backed off. But it wasn't the last time he came around." The prosecutor nodded. "And how did this experience make you feel?" Marcus hesitated, his voice cracking slightly. "Like we didn't matter. Like he could do whatever he wanted because of who he was and because of who we are." The room was silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. When the defense tried to paint Donnelly as an officer just doing his job, the videos told a different story. The evidence of his intimidation tactics and abuse of power was undeniable. Finally, the closing arguments were made. The prosecutor's words echoed through the courtroom. "This case is about accountability. A badge is not a license to bully, to oppress, or to abuse. The people of this community deserve better, and today we have the opportunity to deliver justice. The jury deliberated for hours, but when they returned, their verdict was clear. Guilty on all counts. The room erupted in a mix of cheers and tears. Marcus felt the weight he'd been carrying for weeks finally lift. As Donnelly was escorted out of the courtroom, his gaze briefly met Marcus's. The boy didn't flinch, standing tall and unshaken. Outside, the community gathered on the courthouse steps, their voices united in celebration. Reporters crowded around, asking questions, but Marcus only had one thing to say. This wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. When we stand together, even the biggest bullies can be brought down. Deshaun clapped him on the back. You did good, man. We all did. Jamal hugged his brother tightly, his voice full of pride. You were so brave, Marcus. As the sun set on the courthouse, the neighborhood felt different, stronger, united, and hopeful for the first time in years. The battle had been won, but Marcus knew this was just one step in a much larger fight. Still, as he walked home with his family and friends by his side, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: peace.